Hi, I'm feeling chatty, so I'm going to do some story time. Okay, so while I'm doing some cross stitch, look how pretty. Yeah, copyrighted. It's from this book, Disney Villains, Wickedly Fun Patterns, and I saw that and I was like, I gotta do that. So that's what I'm working on so that I don't get sidetracked. Okay, so, I'm talking about ADHD today, and about what I wish they taught people in the 90s and early 2000s who had ADHD, whether you were diagnosed or not. And now it's ADHD, but it used to be ADD and ADHD were separate. And how they usually did it was, okay, they notice a child, and this is if a school is well funded and they notice this shit, but if they are well funded and they notice struggles, this is what usually happens. Okay. They notice that I wasn't getting my work done on time, even though in class, they could tell that I wanted to learn and I was a teacher's pet, basically. I was always interested in specific subjects. I was always interested in what was said. Like I loved history. I loved some literature I clung to, but it had to be the right story for me. And they noticed that in anything that I wasn't interested in, I did not excel. In fact, I was a D student, sometimes an F, sometimes a C, depending on how bad it was. And they diagnosed me with ADD, and now it's all together, it's ADHD. But all I knew about it, because all they told me about it when I was 8 or 9, was that it's a learning disability that affects your ability to grow academically. Like, they made it all academic based, like, which makes sense. It was a school. They were like, the only thing that matters to us is that we get our performance levels high enough for the state to be happy with us and give us, funding. So yeah, I guess, they had to base everything on academics. But my problem with this was they didn't explain to me that ADD and ADHD, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can actually see what I'm doing. There you go. It affects your whole life. It doesn't just affect school. But what was weird is that's what they told me. They were like, oh, you'll be fine in life. It only just, as long as you don't have to do math. So just avoid math and you'll be good. So what this meant was I didn't choose any degrees going forward in college that had anything higher than Algebra 1 in its curriculum, which really limited me because one of the problems is one of my special interests is engineering, how things go together. Like, that's the only reason I like Animal Crossing is I pretty much ignore my villagers. I just build stuff. Like, I just make a cityscape with bridges, fences, all that shit. I love that stuff. And I wanted to get into Sims as a kid, but Sims was so complicated that it went beyond my dopamine ability level to focus. Like, there were so many little details, and there was no YouTube at the time, so I didn't get into Sims. But I like Animal Crossing. I like hands-on stuff. I like knowing how things go together. I love knowing how bridges are put together, and when things start to fall apart, it makes me really nervous because it's part of my feeling of comfort is knowing that our roads are working, our cars are working, what have you. And that's one reason for my industrial jewelry is I love industrial. I love metal. I love chrome. I want to be decked with chrome. I want to look like a fucking like Terminator. I want to look like a machine because I just love machines. And and technology and how things, I love it. But the problem is I only love certain aspects of it, you know, and they didn't tell me that in school. They basically said, "Oh, just avoid math, you'll be fine." And what's funny is I loved algebra and I loved geometry and I love physics, but you have to do all the other boring stuff to get to that. So guess what my brain did? It erased the boring stuff. If it's boring, my brain will not remember it. And that's the key to ADHD is it's not an attention deficit, it's a dopamine deficit, and it's also a time deficit. Like my brain cannot measure time very well, and it also if something drags on for too long in an area that I'm not already, tuned into, I tune it out. So they didn't tell me that ADHD would affect every aspect of my life, and they didn't say that other things would be attached to ADHD. Like, I'm also autistic. And I know I'm autistic. I know the comments are going to be like, no, you're not autistic. Yes, I am autistic because I only get along with other autistic people. And I only babysat autistic kids. I was known as the autistic whisperer by parents with autistic children in my small town. And it's either I was just the autistic whisperer or I was autistic myself, because guess what? All of my boyfriends and girlfriends are all on the spectrum or are neurodivergent in some way, and they can tune in and understand, right? No one taught me that in school, and they're starting to teach it. I hope they're starting to teach it, that thanks to TikTok and people, coming out and saying, hey, here's a long list of all the things that are affected by ADHD. But that didn't happen when I was in school. So I grew up, my mother was constantly going, oh my God, what's wrong with you? Why are you so lazy? Why don't you want to do dishes? Well, I didn't want to do dishes because there were cockroaches, but also I didn't want to do dishes because there were so many other things tickling my brain. My mom, the one good thing my mom did do for me is she knew that I was goal oriented and that I was incredibly in tune with arts and crafts and tactile shit. So literally my hands, arthritis would be like the bane of my existence because I have to have things in my hands. Like I was that weirdo that I would go to doctor's appointments, church, whatever it was, with a bag of supplies. Like I'd always have like a sewing kit. I'd have my Tamagotchi. I think I have one over here. I'd have like crystals to fidget with. That was how I got up in the morning. Like literally how I get up every single day, because I have so much chronic pain from the exhaustion of having autism and ADHD and trauma and borderline, is what fun activity am I going to do? What's going to get me out of bed? Whether it be food or some dopamine thing. And it literally affects every single aspect of my day. Literally from sunup to sundown, what cool thing do I have to look forward to? And one of the so I was going to talk about my cat, but that's another story. It's pretty much along the same lines. But yeah, they didn't tell us that, us 90s kids, older millennials, because I'm 35, so I'm in the upper, older, almost Gen X. And so my mother, like, I would have, like, she called them, like, battles of will, where I would forget my favorite toy, which would wreck my whole day. Because I forget things a lot, I set things down and then I forget them, even if I intend to, if you have ADHD, Well, there were so many times where my mom turned it into a moral failing when I would forget my favorite stimming toy at home. because usually what I would do is I would make like an imaginary world out of it. Like I remember I would have like my Tamagotchis, and I would pretend like I was like a caretaker of the alien race of Tamagotchis, and all my Tamas were like my creatures from other planets, and I made a whole scenario in my head that got me through a boring ass day. And like my mom would be like, okay, we're gonna get into the motorhome, we're gonna go to the park, we're gonna go camping. And I would be like, yes, cool, right. And then I would forget like my collection of Tamagotchis. And I would ruin the trip. I would be crying, I would be throwing a fit. And my mom saw that as, you're spoiled, you're wrecking my fun. Um, I've spoiled you too much. All you care about is material things. She made it into a religious failing, like you love your toys more than Jesus, kind of a thing. And that shit traumatized me. And still to this day, I have that voice in my head of, oh my god, you spend so much money on toys, because still I collect Tamagotchis to this day. And they're not cheap. Like, they're 30, 40, 50 bucks. And I don't collect the $300 vintage ones because I think, they're probably broken and busted and the buttons are. And there's $300. I'm not going to spend $300 on the special edition Ocean Tamagotchi Ocean. That was a rare item that only was released for like a few months in the 90s, and I never actually got that one, but I wanted it. See, yeah. So there, and also I had to have my collection with me, and when it wasn't with me, it felt like like everything was ripped from my body. Like literally, when I don't have my stimming objects with me, like this is one of them. If I'm not wearing this or something on my lip, I feel like I'm not on the planet. I feel like I'm not engaged. It's awful. It's an awful feeling, but people will shame you for that. Like growing up, I ruined so many camping trips, ruined because I wanted us to turn the van around and go home, or the motorhome, or whatever we were riding in. And I would get into these long fights, and my mom or my grandma would be like, oh my god, why can't you just relax and enjoy nature? Well, I couldn't. Like my brain literally couldn't, because I wanted to take my Tamagotchi animals with me on that journey. Right? To have the journey and to relax, I had to have my STEM objects to do that. And that's the thing that they didn't understand. And that's the thing that nobody told me. And I did not know this until I was in my mid 30s or in late 20s, even. And it's just so awful. I spent, decades of my life being told that I was a brat, being told, and still to this day, my mother thinks I'm a brat. She calls me a brat. And or at least I think she would. I haven't spoken to her in a few years because she just sends me these hate posts about how much of a spoiled, selfish, entitled person I was to live with. And that's not true. It's just I need to have my STEM objects. And if they happen to be, more than 20 bucks, that's considered spoiled. I'm like, I'm sorry that items cost so much, but I did not create the prices, and I do my best to try to keep my hobbies as inexpensive as possible. And even like disabled people, they're like, oh my god, you bought that thing when you could have bought blah blah blah. And I'm like, if I don't have my items, I can't get through the day, let alone get out of bed. And that's not spoiled. That's what I have to do. And I'm sure back, hundreds of years ago, I would have played with, like fabric dolls, and actually I had rag dolls. I've had every number of STEM items that you can imagine. I love it all. It's just I love one or two more than the other at that time, whatever my dopamine fixation tells me to pursue. So I just wanted to bring that up, just to ask, the world, were you told that you were all these things back in the day because they didn't know what they were doing, and it hurt you, and you're still fighting those wounds to this day? Because I sure am. And even though now I know myself better, and now I know, thanks to YouTube and TikTok, and before I even got a therapist, those are my wake up calls that, oh my gosh, this is what's going on. And it makes me feel so much better because I knew that about myself, but I couldn't put words to it at the time. And especially when people are constantly just telling you you're this, you're that, and just dumping that on you, what are you going to do? Tell them no? Because I would do that. I would be like, no, I believe that this is the reality. And they're like, no, you're the child, I'm the adult, you're wrong, right? And now I'm 35, and it's like, no, I am the adult now, and I know, and this has always been what's been best for me. And it's not a moral failing, and I'm not a bitch, and I'm not a brat, and I do like aesthetical things, but I'm not going out and buying Chanel. Come on. So I think this is becoming a turnaround in our culture, and I'm glad of it. And I'm hoping that we continue to learn more about ourselves in the future. But anyway, that's on my mind.